Hello everyone, welcome to day 2 of web services testing. So yesterday we went through what are the web services, how it works, and different type of web services we have. Okay, and mostly we talked about SOAP and REST. So how SOAP works and what are the different terminologies we use, and what are the REST APIs or RESTful web services, and in a very high level term, what are web services and what is REST APIs. Uh, so I hope all those clear to everyone. Whoever just joined this session, please let me know if you have any query. So we'll continue the session where we left yesterday. So yesterday we were talking about REST APIs, what are different feature it has, and how it works. All right. So today we'll talk more about REST APIs because this is the most popular uh, web services currently we have, and as we discussed, most modern applications or any organization, they develop based on the REST uh, architecture style. All right. So there are a few things, a few terms uh, with what we left yesterday. Those I will try to explain, and please pay attention to these terms because they are some very basic building blocks of the REST APIs. All right. So yesterday we talked about how data is transferred. What is the medium which transfer data from client to server, right? So for JSON, as its name suggests, it's a representational state transfer. So what that mean? So representational, it means we can uh, represent our request or whatever we get the data from the server as a response that can be represented in multiple forms. Okay. So if I let me talk let me write here so that it will be easy. So uh, a request or response can be represented in different style. Okay, and what are those? So it can support JSON. Okay, we'll talk about this. It can support HTML, PDF, okay, and etc. Even XML, it can support. But mostly, if you go and work with any application which are built on REST architecture style, they use JSON. Okay, so it is a very simple and human readable format which we will discuss. So it is a JavaScript object notation. So we'll discuss further how we defined and how it works. Okay, so that we'll discuss later. But before that, let's discuss few other things which are important to REST. So first thing, resource. Okay, so whatever we have on server, okay, so whatever data we have on server, whatever data we have on server which we request, right? So that is that call resource. So yesterday we saw like we requested for number of employees on page 2, if you remember. So that is a resource. Okay, so you can think anything like I'll just give a generic example of Amazon. On Amazon, you search a product like a laptop, right? So we are sending a query or means in a Amazon search box, but that will be converted to request and it will send to server, and that server will respond us the list of uh, prices for that laptop or the model of that laptops, different things. So, or if you want like any specific information, like any specific laptop informations, or suppose more generic if you talk like any employee records if you want. So all those are we treat as a resource. Okay. So for now, we'll talk later also in some detail, but for now, just remember whatever uh, data we can retrieve from the server on the server, that is a resource. Whatever we request, that is a resource, right? Now, to retrieve those data from the servers, we have to use some resource methods. So the terminology is called HTTP verbs. Okay, and I'll just tell you the four methods which is very common and mostly these only used. Other there are other couple of other methods as well, but that at this point because we all may be beginner in the web services, so I'll skip those. Okay, so that is put, post, get, and delete. So any resource will support these. Um, there's a condition if define what we need to do with that resource, right? So suppose there is a employee, okay, employee registration. All right, so there is a employee registration. I can say here, suppose this is employee registration. Okay, now you have now I'll use another term that is endpoint. Okay, so what is endpoint now? You may ask this question. So endpoint is which uniquely uh, identify locate these resources. Okay, so for now just remember that endpoint is how to identify any resource uniquely, right? So we have suppose employee records. So to create employee record, we may have one endpoint. Okay, so I would say endpoint. I'll write also that will be much easier. Okay, so here I'll write endpoint. So what is endpoint? We discuss unique locator of resource, right? So yesterday we saw it will be like this API, suppose employee, right? Uh, this and then it will be like if we have to access any employee record, so we need to pass employee ID, right? So this is the endpoint which uh, uniquely identify this resource, or employee is a resource here, right? Because we are searching or modifying employee records. Now there is another term called URI. Okay, that is uh, uniform resource identifier. So what is that? So that is complete URL. Here will be your server name, right? And then this endpoint address. So this become URI, and this you will use whenever you want to create any record or delete any record. We haven't come across these methods. We'll tell, because these were some necessary terms I need to explain you. Now this become a complete URL. Okay, so we know, right, on which server our API is hosted, and what is the unique endpoint which locate this resource, right? Now this employee resource may support put and post. Maybe I should write here. Let me cut and paste here. Yeah. So post is for to create record, right? So post is to create a record. So suppose I want to create a employee. So this URI whatever I have written here, this supports to create a employee record in our database, right? So using any client like Postman or SOAP UI, yesterday we saw SOAP UI, right? So I can send this request, and that will create a employee resource for us. Okay, and resource also uniquely identify uh, with unique numbers. So each employee will be given a employee ID, right? Or you can say any in applications there will be versions. So that as a resource ID. So each resources will have unique IDs. So that's how REST works. So suppose I want to read some data, whatever record I have created, right? So I'll use this get to read record. Okay. So similar endpoint it can be, okay, similar, but it will be a get in endpoint. So this may support get, and here this will be uh, this will support a post. So here we are saying just create a employee, because that time employee will not have any employee ID, right? So the post URL will be like this, and along with, because employee record, if we are going to create employee records, it needs employee name, date of birth, contact number, email ID, and personal details, home address, office address, and many other things, right? So those we pass as a request body. So there's another term. Let me scroll this one. Yeah. Let me know if you have any question in between. I can take those questions. So to create any record, you need a request body. So that can be in JSON format or HTML format. So let's talk about only JSON. Okay. So I'll just explain little bit how JSON looks like. Okay. Now it will be like employee name, right? Then we say ABC. So if you are familiar with any programming language, we have seen like dictionary, like key value pairs, right? Similar to that, it works always. There will be key and there will be value, right? Now I can say date of birth, and it can be anything like 01/01/1990, something like this, right? So yeah, this is just example. This is just a JSON form. So you can see how simple it is and how human readable it is, how easy to read this. Like this is, we are passing employee name, here we are passing employee date of birth, and other information will go on this way. So that is JSON. So we'll see how when we create a post request, so we need this URL, request body, okay, and some headers. So we talked yesterday, talked there are some headers required. So we'll talk in detail what are headers and why it is required. For now, just note that there are some headers which require. I'll explain a little bit. Headers are some additional info about request, right? So headers we send along with the request, which consist some extra additional information like if it request require any authentication, so it will use that authentication, okay, like user ID and password, or what will be the uh, application type. So there are different headers, we'll talk about those. Okay, so just any question till now? I hope you are able to get what I'm trying to explain. Guys, you all with me? Okay, so yeah, let's make it more interactive so that I can also be aware like whatever I'm telling, you guys are also able to understand. Okay, so you can ping if anyone has any question. So that about a post request, right? So all these information we send and then we get the response. Now another method which resource supports is get. So get is to record data. It doesn't require any request body, right? So we are just reading data. We don't have to uh, send any request body like this JSON format. So yeah, and there we can just get the response. So along with this also, and each and every request, whatever you are sending, that require headers if it is defined. So you must remember that uh, each and every request in REST APIs require few things like URL. If it is post, then request body, headers, right? If it is get request, it will be only URL and headers, right? Next is post. So suppose you created record, right? This one. So your put request also be a similar kind of thing. So I'll put here. So put is to update, modify, record, resource. Okay. Now, if you want to modify any record or resource, so you need to send the unique ID of that resource, right? Like for which employee you want to modify the records, because you cannot modify all the employee records at once. It can be, means it will be a different endpoint or a different API, but uniquely to modify uniquely, you need, sorry, what I did. Okay, so we need employee ID. So now this endpoint will or this API, I'm using this terminologies. So uh, please don't get confused like what is API and endpoint. Okay, so uh, I hope you understand those. So yeah, so we whenever we have to update any record, and there we need unique resource ID, right? And then there will be a request body like we saw in post request. So suppose we want to modify some information of employee, so we will send this, okay, and of course with headers. So it will modify the any employee ID, whatever you send here, like 2 3 4 5. So this is employee ID, it will modify, right? Then we have a delete method to delete records from the database. It should also have this kind of unique resource URL. So this is unique is a resource URL. This is one resource, and how it can be uniquely identified with this employee ID, right? So when you send a request to delete this employee from the record, it will delete, right? So we talked about headers, we talked about request, response, whatever we get. Let's talk about uh, so yeah, the response will also will receive similar to this fashion, or based on how other additional information uh, required, right, to send from the server to client. So uh, you may not see this exactly same JSON whatever we are sending. It may have some additional information like when you see this, it will have employee ID, because that was already generated in the system, and that can be like this, and any other additional information which we want to expose in this response, right? So that will be sent to client. So till now methods are clear how it works to everyone. So we talked about resource methods, what are endpoints, and what are the different resource method we have. All right, let me see if anyone has any question. Okay, so no question. So I hope there are only two things: you are getting everything what I'm telling, or the other way. So all right, so let's talk about status code. So along with the response, there are I think you should also read HTTP status code. So when you get time, just read about what are the HTTP codes we have. Okay. So there's one question, what additional information should be under headers? Okay, so I'll quickly mention here. So under headers, uh, there will be like, I'm just giving an example, application type. Okay, so there's a one here also with like a key value pairs. Okay, so I can say JSON. Now, uh, if it requires any authorization key, we'll talk about what are these authorization key. So authorization key is a unique, uh, every time when you have to access any endpoint, so there will be one alphanumeric key will be generated by the system. Okay, but for the testing purpose, what developers does, they will create a static key which will be throughout in your testing, it will be the same, or even after that also. So you need to pass authorization key. It may be something like this. Okay, so it can be anything. So that is security key we pass. And some more like user ID, because we need to put some authentication around the endpoint, so that whatever we want to give the permission to a few people, that should be in contact, so that nobody can have unauthorized access, so that they can uh, enter in our system, they can do anything, right? So we have to secure our request also. So mainly when you work with an organization, so all the request for the specific application, they will be secured with authorization key, which is runtime. It is generated at runtime, and then there is some specific group of people who have access to these. Okay, and some there are some uh, web services or APIs which expose to public. Right. Yesterday we saw that employee numbers, right, in the SOAP UI, or there are public APIs as well, which only give you to get the records, right? So there we don't need any user ID or authorization key, because that is exposed to use by public. So there are APIs which are secured, there are APIs which are publicly exposed. So depending on the organization, uh, how they want their server or their endpoint to be accessed outside of the world, uh, or theirs outside of their system, so they should restrict or based on the requirement. So I hope that is clear what additional information we send in headers. So let's talk about HTTP codes, what status code we receive. So there are some series, 200 series, 300 series, 400 series, and 500 series, right? I would ask you to please go and read. Uh, there are 201, there are 202, similar. There is 301, 302, similar to this, right? And you must have aware of this 403, 404, 500, right? So we have some status codes. Please go and read. Mostly we see this 200, that is okay. So when you send a request and that is processed by the server, and it return the response to the client, you'll always see this 200 okay code, status code. It means everything is passed, right? If 300 I'm missing, but okay, let me tell you about the 400. 400 about bad request, right? This is something I guess related to authorization, I guess, but I need to check. Sorry for this. All right. So uh, if there is some errors in your request, whatever you are sending, like uh, 403, 404, like page not found, you have seen multiple time. You may have seen. So those are bad requests. It's saying like there is something error in your request. There is something wrong in your request. Please correct it. So suppose uh, you are sending to delete some records, and that endpoint name is employee, and you are sending this a typo in the URL, right? It will throw up some 400 series like saying bad request or page not found, right? So th- uh, that we have, and then we have a 500 series that is internal server error. So if during the request processing, if something has some exception has occurred, or server has thrown some error, so that will be, you will get the 500 status code. Okay, so you must remember these some few series which is very important in terms of how to verify, right? So team, let me know if we have any question. The HTTP 300 multiple choices redirect status response code indicates that. Okay, yeah. So that one someone has mentioned about this. Okay, so yeah, please go through all these. Yeah, question please. If anyone wants to talk, I can unmute. No questions. Let me again go to that which one we were using yesterday, right? Meanwhile, team, let me know if you have any question. So all these list of endpoints we see here, like first is list users, that is get single user, right? There's a post. So I'll explain this with some example. Okay. So this will be see, I'll explain here itself, and we'll start with SOAP-UI in the next session. Okay. So this is the endpoint. This is the server URL. So endpoint you need to add here. Okay. And this is the JSON request. So as I have explained, name and job, you want to create a record of the user. Now when you get the response will be something like this, like name, job, ID, created at. So it will display the date. All right, and you will get the some 200 series response if everything is perfectly fine. Similar to put, if you want to update anything, so you can send, and you'll also the similar kind of post request, right? Delete. So all this will talk in detail from the next session. All right. So yeah, that's it from my side today, team. Unless anyone has any question, we can discuss.
Manoj, I'm good too. In fact, taking the team into the next training after this. So Manoj, there's a lot that we have to do. I myself have not dug in so deep, but as we go about it, I think there's a lot of rich content. It's very much applicable to almost all the projects. If you see what we're doing, we have to consider web services, API, backend. Great. I'm good. Any questions from the audience? So as a schedule, team, next week, Monday or Tuesday, Manoj is going to continue with the remaining couple of weeks of the training on hands-on, taking the project one after the other. Thanks, Manoj. Thank you so much. We'll see you in the next session then.
Yeah, thank you, Karthik. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you all. Bye.